Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I appreciate you spending a few minutes of your week with us. Today, we're going to be talking about finding joy despite our circumstances. Today's guest knows what it's like to face trials and triumph and find joy despite her circumstances. The verse I've chosen to encapsulate today's episode is James 1, verses 2 through 4. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Today's guest is my friend, Christina Custodio. She's a wife, mother, teacher, writer, photographer, and anything else that the Lord asked her to do from day to day. She's an inspirational speaker and writer who shares from her own story, as well as inspires her audience to share their stories, connecting and becoming a part of the community of Christ. Christina is currently working on her first book, in which she will share the trials and the victories she experienced as she lived in a hospital with her son for 44 days. Welcome to the program, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Christina, so often our passion comes out of our own hurts and trials.
Mm-hmm.
As a mother, you always had a sense or a knowing or a belief that your son might die. Will you talk to us a little bit about that?
I did, and it was an odd thing. And I know mothers, we tend to have irrational fears about our children anyway. We think, someone's going to crawl up the wall of our house and break open a window and steal our babies, or, every kind of scenario, ridiculous or not, goes through our head. But with Isaiah, it was different than it was with my daughters. I never felt like they were going to die. I checked on all of my children, but for Isaiah, I checked more to make sure he was breathing all the time. I just felt like he was going to die. I didn't know how, but I felt like it was going to be young.
How do you go through life with that pervasive fear?
It wasn't, I don't know that I put as much thought into it as it sounds. Probably it was just kind of always in the back of my mind. And, you have thoughts. We all have thoughts, and we don't know if we're crazy or, I didn't necessarily think that I was right. I hoped I wasn't right. I didn't know why I would be right, but it just was always in the back of my mind. It wasn't necessarily I'm scared to death all the time kind of thing. It was just there. And I feel like God maybe put that in me.
So I know it's one of your passions to help others find joy despite their circumstances, but life hasn't always been what those on the outside might perceive as joyful for your family. So take us back in time to a life-changing event that happened to your son, Isaiah.
He was 13 years old. He was in 8th grade, and he played football, and it was September 8th of 2015. We were headed to football practice and talking about the next day, and it was exciting. It was his first real football game. He was playing for the D team, and I dropped him off and went and got some groceries, came back, and not too long after I got home, I got a phone call from one of the trainers telling me that he had a bad headache and needed to be picked up. And I started to put the groceries away, just finished, because I thought it's a headache. He'll be all right. And something told me, no, go now. Mm-hmm. And so I got there, and I was actually on the phone with a friend and continued talking, because I thought he'll see me and he'll get in the car. But as I sat there for a minute, I noticed that a coach and a trainer picked him up off, he was on the ground. They picked him up off the ground and practically dragged him over to me in the car. And I thought, that's so weird. He's so dramatic. It's just a headache. And I got out and I said, Isaiah, and I said it kind of firm, like, stop playing around, stand up. And he couldn't stand up, and his eyes were rolling in the back of his head, and he was saying one word at a time. He was saying home, home. And then he was saying hurt. And the final word really got me. He said help. And that scared me. I thought something's really not right. So, and he was throwing up, and he was just very out of it. So we got him in the back of the car. Later, didn't worry about a seatbelt, just got him in, and I headed toward the emergency room. Now I know we should have called 911,
I was
but
just going to ask you, why did the coaches not call 911?
well, that's a good question. And I think later they did not follow protocol. They did not follow protocol. But I think it just, they weren't hitting that day. I think it's because they couldn't have guessed what was wrong with him. They were just practicing plays, running plays, not hitting. So it didn't make sense that he would, go down like this. So we got to the hospital, and he was pretty much unresponsive. He was involuntarily moving at some point. His arms would move and his legs would move, but he was not responding to anything. He was not focusing on anything. And I felt like they weren't going fast enough for me as a mom. We all know that. You take care of my baby. And at one point I took my cell phone and I flashed in his eyes. I didn't know what I was doing. I truly believe it was God guiding my steps. And I flashed a cell phone in his eyes, and I noticed that his pupils were fixed. And I thought, aren't they supposed to move when there's light? And then I noticed one was bigger than the other. And I thought, something's really wrong. And I said to my dad and my husband, who were there by that time, something is really wrong. And called the nurse, and I told him what I saw. He looked in Isaiah's eyes and ran out. And I looked at them. I said, I think it's his brain. I don't know why I thought that, but that's what I felt. And my dad said, Christina, you're not a doctor. Don't try and diagnose him. He's okay. But they came back, took him for a CT scan. And I could tell by the look on the nurse's face when he got back that it was very serious. And we found out that he had severe hemorrhaging in his brain, and his brain was filling up with blood. And he needed emergency brain surgery. And, it was surreal. I thought, you're going to cut into my baby's brain. And at that time I said, this is it. This is it. This is the day that I knew was going to come. It's today. And I just thought, but he's 13 years old. He hasn't even started life yet. And it was just kind of, I was in a fog. It was a nightmare. And we got to the hospital, and in that waiting room, the word got out. I sent a text to a few people, church friends and family. And not long after I arrived at the hospital with Isaiah in the ambulance, we had to change hospitals because they couldn't do that kind of surgery where we were. The waiting room started filling up with friends and family, and filled up. Like there was a family already there that moved out into another room because the room was full. And just the support was incredible. But there was a point where I left that room and went into the bathroom, and I could not believe what was happening. And my child was dying. And I knew it because I felt God had told me that he was going to die. And I was, this is it. I can't believe we're here. And I sat down in the bathroom, and I cried, but it wasn't hysterical. Tears down my face. And I prayed. I didn't know what to say. So I just prayed, God, change your mind, change your mind, change your mind, change your mind, over and over. And That's all I could think to say, because I saw in the Bible places where he had done that, and I didn't know what that meant exactly, but that's what I prayed for. So
So did you have fear?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I was afraid. I didn't want to live that life. I did not want to be that person that had a dead son.
Okay.
I, worst nightmare. I would have thought, if you would have asked me before that night, what would you do if you lost one of your children? I would say die. I would die. Just Jesus take me. But I walked out of that bathroom and I felt an incredible peace. And it's not because I knew he wasn't going to die, because I didn't. I was very aware that God could still choose to take him, but I knew we'd be okay. He told me that it didn't matter what happened. He was going to take care of me and my family. My marriage would be okay. My daughters would be okay. It was going to hurt, but we were going to be okay. And we would use it somehow. We would glorify him somehow. And so I had peace. I didn't feel happy. I
Right.
was still, feeling devastated, but at the same time, okay, my son is going to die, but we're going to be okay. It was an odd feeling.
I find myself holding my breath as you're sharing this story. So, friends, we're going to pause right here because I want to hear more because Christina's got an amazing testimony to share with you. So, we're going to take a real quick 1-minute commercial break, let you all catch your breath, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back with your hope-filled perspective, where today Christina Custodio is my guest, and we're sharing about finding joy despite our circumstances. And before the break, we were talking about a parent's worst nightmare. And Christina, you were sharing about how Isaiah had a brain hemorrhage and had to have brain surgery.
Yes.
What do you think was one of the biggest lessons you learned through Isaiah's injury, his hospitalization, his recovery?
The biggest thing that I learned is that regardless of what's happening, and by the way, I don't think I told people, yeah, he lived. He made it through the
Okay, now I
surgery.
can let my breath out.
Yes. He made it through the surgery, and of course we had so many prayer warriors, there that night, and just praying that one of the prayers was, God, if you let Isaiah live, we promise that we are going to use it to your glory. It's those, we kind of tried to make a deal with God. We promise we will use this and we will not waste this life. And so he lived. We didn't know how he was going to live.
How old is Isaiah now?
Isaiah's 18 now.
Okay, so this happened 5 years ago.
Yes. So we didn't know if he was going to be able to walk, talk, and they told us he may not. He may be a vegetable if he survived. But the whole time we were in the hospital, 44 days, we saw God in every single moment. That night, we were waiting for him to have surgery and find out if he would live or die that night. There were other people there. There were other families there. And my church family came with food. It looked like a church potluck in that waiting room. We had a table full of food, and we were able to minister to other families that night. Some of my church family sat and prayed with those families, and they got fed for days. Whoever happened to be in that waiting room, there was always food for our family, but for whoever needed it. And that was a beautiful thing. We would not have been able to do that if we hadn't been in the hospital. I met a woman who was there, a single mom with her toddler. I could look at her and tell that she was in need. And I looked at one point and asked her what size shoes she wore, because she had holes in her shoes, and she wore a size 10, but her shoes were a size 8. and she was in need. So I was able to call out to my church family, and we were able to get shoes and clothes for them, and that was in the ICU. And those little things, even just being able to minister to other people while we were there and not be so focused on our own struggles and our own pains, it meant so much to me that we had that opportunity to serve other people. And I just, there were so many situations like that where I just had to thank God for giving me and my family an opportunity to look elsewhere instead of just being so focused on what was going on and being worried about what was going to happen with Isaiah. And the whole time we met people, and even through writing each day about what was going on, keeping everybody updated, there were so many God moments and so many lessons that we learned through all of it. And it was not fun. We lived in a hospital. Isaiah and I lived in that hospital. I slept on one of those chair/bed things for 44 days. But I would not trade it. I learned so much about God and what he does. Regardless of what's happening, there's always something you can find that's good in the midst of something horrible, because this world is Satan's. He roams, he seeks to devour, but God is always there. He always gives us something to hold on to if we look for it. It's usually right in front of our faces, but we've got to find it. We've got to see it. It's always there.
So when you look back, what stands out in your mind as some of those lessons that he showed you in the midst of tragedy, really?
Just really to look for him always. And even if things do not turn out the way we want them to, that they can still be good, because God sees the bigger picture. He sees what happened yesterday, what's going on today, and he knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And if we trust him and we don't fight him and what he's trying to show us and teach us, then life is going to be so much better, and we're going to have peace because we trust that what he's doing or what he's allowing to happen will make us better now or in heaven. But there's so many things that he does. And I prayed for Isaiah's complete healing. I believed that God would heal him completely and that he would be just the same, if not better than he was before, and he would be able to play football again. And that did not happen. He is still weak on his right side, just like someone who's had a stroke. He he can't use his right hand very well. He can't see. He has no peripheral vision from the right side. He can only see up here. So that God did not answer that prayer for complete healing, but what Isaiah is so much better, because he has a deeper connection with God. He knows that God covers him even in his weakness. His testimony is so much greater because he is the most joyful kid you will ever meet, regardless of the fact that he has to wear a leg brace and he has a limp and he's got a big, beautiful scar across his head. I love his scar because it shares a story. And he says, if you ask him, is it okay, would you wish that it was different? He says yes and no, because he sees what God's done, but it's hard. But he's still joyful. He knows he makes a difference in people's lives.
Why do you think people are so drawn to Isaiah's story?
Because it's hard. It was a very difficult thing that happened, and people are drawn to train wrecks, for one. People are drawn to train wrecks. You can't look away. But even though there's that, you can see and feel God in it. God is all over it. And you see a picture of Isaiah, joy is the first word that pops in your head. He is so full of Jesus, and just, he is such a bright light. And I think people are drawn to him and who he is, regardless of what happened to him. He was 13, he was just beginning the good life.
Yeah.
And there are some things he can't do that he might have been able to do before, or he can't do them as well. And it's frustrating, but he's so joyful. And people don't want to see misery. They don't want to, they might watch it for a second, but they don't want to sit with it, and I think it's just, his story is beautiful because it's not perfect and it's scarred, but God is all over it. He's all the way through it.
So do you believe that God literally changed his mind in Isaiah's situation?
Huh. I've thought about this. I don't think it's a literal changing of his mind, because we know that God knows
Mm-hmm.
the future. I think the way that we can understand it, it seems like he changed his mind. I think God knew how we were going to handle it. He obviously knew how we were going to handle it. So it could have gone either way. If we chose to be mad and angry and turn it into something where we blamed God for, Isaiah dying, if he had died, um, I don't I think God knew. He knew what we were going to do. So I think he knew that that was the outcome that would bring him the most glory. So even though he told me that Isaiah could die, I believed he would die, he knew how we would handle it. And so when it looks like a changing of mind, it's really just what he knew was going to happen. I don't know if that explains it well, but
It does, but what I hear you saying is he was looking for you to say, I'm going to trust you
yes.
regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, when we say, Lord, I'm going to trust you, you know better than I do, then it gives God the freedom to do whatever he needs to do.
Yes.
Were you or Isaiah ever angry about the things he lost?
I never felt anger. I felt there were some things that I mourned.
Mm-hmm.
I did mourn what I thought would be.
Mm-hmm.
When he first started playing football, I wanted nothing to do with it. I was worried and scared. But then I saw how much he loved it and he was good. And he was so excited to have a season. So I mourned that he lost that. I
Mm-hmm.
mourned that he probably wouldn't ever be able to play again. And that's something he also mourned. So we tried to say, well, you could be a coach, or you can, there are different things, there are different ways you can participate in this. But it was just more of a mourning. And I have concerns. I can't say worry or fear. I have to trust God with it, who he's going to marry and who's going to love him, even though he has these things. And I know God's going to handle it. I know God's going to, give him what he needs. But it doesn't make me angry, because Isaiah, he's just a beautiful soul, and you can't, he's still a beautiful soul, and you can't be angry with that. And he's alive. He is alive.
Praise God for that. Friends,
Yes.
we're going to take a real short 1-minute commercial break, but stick with us, because when we return, I'm going to ask Christina to share a hope-filled perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Christina, this story of Isaiah's is riveting, and it's compelling to see both how God worked on yours and Isaiah's behalf, but also how you looked for opportunities to see God in the situation. But if a listener is going through a difficult time right now and things on the outside may not seem real joyful, what hope-filled perspective would you want to offer to them?
Really, just what I continue to say is look for God in every single circumstance, because he's always there. sometimes I think he really is, it's blaringly obvious, but when we are so focused on what's going wrong, then we cannot see it. So if we can remember that he's always there, that there is always something, he's always putting his hand out saying, here's this other thing, here's this salve, here's something, that's this ointment that's going to help you through this. I know it's hard, but here's this other thing that I have for you. And, instead of, even when someone dies, did you have what part of their life can you see that was beautiful? Or what happened in a day that gave you hope or peace? Did you see a bird fly by and you just felt like it represented? And it sounds like, I'm in La La Land, but those things are real. God gives of himself always, and believing that. And that it's a matter of trust and a matter of believing him when he says that he will never leave us. And he tells us that. So if we believe him, that's all the hope we need, that he is going to get us through things, even if they don't look the way we wanted them to. We just have to believe that he loves us enough. And sometimes I think we mess things up because we don't see that, and we fight and we react to these things, and then we miss it, instead of sitting back and trusting and remembering. First, we've got to believe it, and then we've got to remember who he is. We've got to believe that God is who he says he is, and he loves us, and he wants the very best thing for us. And even though he allows these things to happen, it's not what he wanted for his people. He did not want us to deal with pain and struggle, but, through the fall of man and man's free will, things happen. And it is hard to hold on, to grasp why he allows bad things to happen to good people. But it's free will overall, and, things trickle down. But he's always there, and he will always provide something good, always, if we look for it, if we accept it. And we don't have to look hard. It's always there, but we've got to trust him.
And I think that's the key. Early on in this episode, you relayed how you felt peace after you came out of that bathroom in the hospital, after you'd been praying. But Isaiah 26:3 tells us that you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you,
Yes.
all whose thoughts are fixed on you. Yes. So we aren't going to have that peace if we're not focused on him, if we're not trusting him.
Right.
We cannot have peace apart from him.
Right.
And so when you prayed and you trusted God,
right,
he gave you that peace.
Yes.
That probably others didn't have.
Right.
In that hospital. And then you were able to extend that.
Yes.
To those around you.
And I think it's important for people to remember, just because you have peace doesn't mean you're happy about what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yes, because it still hurt. It hurt, and it was scary, and I did not want to go through it. I told him, God, I don't want to do this, but I trust you. And it's a peace. It's that peace that passes all understanding. It doesn't make sense that I could feel that way, that I could at the same time beg him not to do it, but also have peace that if he did it, it was going to be okay. But it's trust.
I want to leave you with Isaiah 40:31 that says, but those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. I don't know what you are going through today. I don't know what brought you to this episode today. But what I know is that through Christina's story about what Isaiah went through, it's clear that the Lord is asking us to trust Him when it doesn't make sense, to trust Him when things are not going the way we want them to go, and to trust that He will take care of us, He will bring us through it, and He will bring good from it. And as you trust, you will experience an increase in that supernatural peace that doesn't make sense. Christina, thank you for sharing your story and Isaiah's story.
Thank you.
It's a testimony of how bad things happen. But when we're willing to trust God, we can experience joy even when we don't like our circumstances.
Mm.
Friends, I hope that there was something that we touched on today that encouraged you, that gave you hope, and that will give you pause to ponder and perhaps trust your Heavenly Father even more. If this episode encouraged you, I would ask you to go and rate and review this podcast and then share it with a friend who's going through a hard time and needs to know it is possible to have joy despite your circumstances.
Amen.
This has been another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Until next time, may you have a hope-filled week.